Frankie, and in this video we're going to be covering this user interface here, which is just a list of variable size. So you can see you add an input and then your data is updated with various whatever data you have. And this list here, this list component, is completely stateless. It just passes the updated data up through its props. So this is used in a variety of places, from to-do lists to tags, anything where you have a list of things and it can grow and shrink depending on user interaction, and also update depending on what they type. So we're going to cover this. It's just going to be the single text field, and we're going to have the add button and also add the remove button. So over here you can see we have just a project opened in WebStorm. It's based on the React hot boilerplate, which I just cloned, and we're going to start editing based on that. And I'll publish the changes in a gist or something. For more complicated situations, you might want to use immutable.js or another similar library, but in this video we're just going to use the React updates add-on, which you can see here. It has a pretty simple syntax where you see this is setting the z property of the y property of the x property of my data, but not modifying, not mutating the data. It's creating a new version of that object. So this gives you immutability and the performance benefits that come with that, along with easier to understand code. And here we have Webpack dev server running, and it just says hello world. And this is hot module replacement, so if we change this and hit save, in a second or so it'll update as long as everything's going well. The first update takes a bit. Okay, so now we have our app, and our app needs to have some state. This is where we're going to put the state. You could put it in a store or another similar place. So to do that with our ES6 classes, we create a constructor. And in our constructor, we call super, which we'll call react.components constructor. And then we say this.state equals items, and that's just going to be an empty array to start. Okay. Now we also just need a function that lets us update our state. So handle change data or items. And we'll say this.set state items. Okay. So far, hopefully you're following along if you're a little bit comfortable with React. All this is going to do is whenever handle change is called, it's going to update items with the value passed to it. So now we need to go and whenever you're doing something like this, it's good to create a usage of your component before you actually write the component itself. So doing this, we find a comfortable API before we think about implementing the component. So we're just going to create tabs, and this can be, or not tabs, sorry, to-do list. I don't know, we'll call it to-do list. And we're going to pass it two props. So we're just going to call it value, which is this.state.items, and onChange equals this.handle change .bind this. If this looks familiar, it's exactly the same API as an input has, except instead of getting an event object and onChange, we're going to get the updated version of the data we pass here. Now this is important to note because we're passing an object, which happens to be an array, and we expect to get the same object back, which creates a very simple API when used across an application. If you're using something like immutable, you'll be passing one value down, which is the cursor, but we're going to do it like this for now, and we just have to say it's self-closing. Okay, so now we're going to create a new file. Over here, new, I think I just have a template for this. Let's see if this works. To-do list. Okay, so this is basically the same structure as we had in the other yeah, we'll add it to Git. Okay. And then we'll just go back into our app here and we'll grab that. So import TodoList from /TodoList. Okay, so now this variable can be resolved here. And that's all for our application. So we're going to come over into our to-do list, and for good practice, we should create our props appropriately, our prop types. So we're going to say value is React prop types dot it's an array required. And I'm not going to go into the full thing. Usually I do my my prop types as exact as I can, so I would mention that the array is an array of objects that contain a text and ID field. Okay. So then on change is just prop types dot func dot I guess it doesn't have to be required. Cool. So we have an array in our props. We have a change handler that expects an updated version of that array anytime anything changes. So this is a bit tricky, but what we're going to do in this component here is just handle the add, the remove, and any sort of change to an item. But we're actually going to create another file to represent the item, which is responsible for updating the actual item. So if we go into here and create a new file, we're going to say TodoItem. Okay. So in TodoItem, we're just going to leave it like that for the moment. And we are going to say import. Great. So now, like I said before, we should always write the usage of our item before, or our subcomponent before we write the subcomponent itself. So we're going to go in here and we're going to say this.props.value.map. And here we're just going to have item, and we will return TodoItem. Value is item on change equals this dot handle item change dot bind, and we're going to pass the index in here. So we're going to say this and index. Now index isn't defined, but we can get that from the map function. Okay. And we're also going to say, let me just break this onto multiple lines because my editor is shrunk a bit, and it'll just look nicer. Great. Okay. So we actually need to pass a key because we're going to allow removing items. Now, you might have been looking at that ID thing before and been wondering what the purpose of that was. It's clearly not something we're getting from the server in this case, but it could be. The reason we have that is when you remove, say, this middle input here, React needs to know that it's supposed to remove that input and not, because otherwise, if you don't have these IDs, you just say the index of this one stays the same, but the index of this one changes. So it's going to remove this input here and then update this input to have the value of nothing or whatever's in the last one. And it just works kind of weird and can cause user experience problems. So instead of that, we're just going to give it a key, which is item.id in this case. Okay. So now we have our to-do item, and now we have to go and define this handle item change function. So how does that work? Well, like we said here, we're passing up an updated value that we're passed. So we're going to get an updated item back, and we know that the first argument of our function is the index because we're binding that. So then we're also going to get the item. Okay, and then I think I have like a macro for this. Okay, const. Okay, so now what this did is this is react.addons.update, and then the first argument we're passing is the value that we were passed. So this is our array right here. Then we have an empty slot here where we're going to put how we want it to change, and then we call the onChange handler and pass the updated value right here. So hopefully that makes sense. Now we need to we're just updating an item in the array, so we're going to use the ES6 syntax, which lets us have a dynamic object key. So in this case, we're saying the key is the value of index. It's not the string index, it's whatever index evaluates to, which is like 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're creating an object like 3 item or something, right? So at that index, we want to perform an action. The action is we want to set, notice the $, which informs React that this is in fact an action. We're going to set the value to item. And that's all. We're just updating a value at an index. There's nothing more complex going on here. React basically just does what we ask. It slices the array and inserts the item at that spot. Okay, so now that we have that, that's enough for us to go back to our TodoItem after we find out where we have an error in this according to WebStorm. TodoItem, unchange, let's see. I have my Webpack dev server running on another screen here, but I can probably just switch to this. Okay. On change, handle item change, bind index. I was just missing a parentheses. Cool. Love being able to get compile time errors in the browser just automatically. That's somewhat nice. And then we can just see if it updated and everything's fine. Appears. Cool. So we go into TodoItem, and now we have to fulfill this API of the value in the onChange. So of course we're going to need an input for the user to type their text into. So we'll just wrap it in a div. No real reason. It'll wrap nice. Cool. Input value is this.props.value. And on change is this.handleChange.bind this. Cool. And we'll just close that. That's it. Now if we come down here, we're going to just create handle change, which takes an event. And we're going to use my update macro again, and our props name is value, so I'm just typing in value, which fills it into this spot, this spot, this spot. And in this case, it's just text. So all we're going to do is say, update it by, oh, actually, we don't even need all of this. All we need to do is say event, or, oh, right, our value is an object. So what we need to do is say text, and then just set it to event.target.value. So when this happens, we take our props.value, which is an object with a text and an ID property, and we just say update the text by sending it to event.target.value, which is whatever the user just entered in the input, and then pass that on back up. I would normally do the prop types, but just in the interest of time, I'm gonna not do that. Hopefully it doesn't bite us during this demo. So next thing we need to do is add a way to add an input, and then we'll be able to test this in the browser. Or actually, Let's just go over to app.js and put an input in for the moment. So I'm just going to create a thing that says text foobar ID 1. And we're also going to see if it's updating. So I usually just put a pre and stringify our state. Okay. Now I'll probably need to refresh it because of the structural changes to the application versus minor edits. Prop type is not defined, which is going to be in this file, and prop types. Okay, let's see if it can update it. Okay, so now we have that because we didn't check. So you see here, this is our input. Notice how easy it is to identify these bugs if you once you understand it. This is a object, so we need to get the text property, and then we can just update our application. Everything should be fine. Okay, so we have foobar, and what happens if we type? Cannot read property update of undefined because I haven't included React/addons, which I usually do in my main file. React/addons. This is going to take a minute to compile. I know this is a very raw demo. I didn't try this at all first. So now you see that it's updating again. Cool. Now we want to get rid of that item here, or we'll just leave that there. And we want to add the ability to add another item to our list. So we're going to do that right here. Under this, we're going to add a button. Add. Okay. And on click, we are going to say this dot handle item add bind this. Okay. So now we need to think about this from the perspective of providing an update. In what way do we want to update our data? Well, we have an array. We want to push an item onto the end of the array. Okay, so we're going to go update value, and in here, what's the name of our array? Well, it's value. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to push. Now this is a little bit of weird syntax, but this array here that corresponds with the push is any number of things you want to push. So if you want to just push one thing, you can put it here, or you can separate them by commas. We're not actually pushing an array onto the end. So what do we want to push? Text is nothing. And ID, we can just use any random ID for this because it's just for the purpose of the key. So math.random, and then just convert it to a string. Okay. Let's see if this updates. Cool. So now we have this update button here, and we can add an item, and expected target of push to be an array got undefined. I believe this is saying that we actually need to wrap this also in an array because it's any number of push operations, and push is veridic. So yeah, that's how it's going to work. Okay, what happens if I expected target of push to be an array. Oh, that's silly. I know what we're doing. We're updating the value. We're not updating this .props, so we need to just push onto it directly because the value we're updating is an array. And I think we can get rid of this. Let's see how this works out. Reformat, save. add, and we get another input. We can add that. Okay, all good, right? So now we're going to take this and we are going to turn this into something that we can add and remove from. Now, why do we not have the remove button in TodoItem? Well, that's because TodoItem's responsibility doesn't care if it's in a list. It could be a single to-do item and there could be no way to remove it. All it cares about is providing the mechanism to update the to-do item data. So if we added a checkbox, that would also be its responsibility. But if we want to add things like moving items up and down in the list and other things like that, that's not the responsibility of the item, that's the responsibility of the list. And TodoList handles the list responsibilities. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're just going to come in here and actually grab this again, and we'll wrap each item in a div. And we'll just add an HR to the bottom to be cool, because HRs are cool. It's like a separator, but like you don't have to do any CSS. I heard it's the new thing. So now that we have that, it's just going to attempt to update, and now all of our stuff has that, and we need to add a button. So I'm just going to say, let's just make it the link on click. This dot handle remove dot bind this, and we'll pass the index along right here, and then we're just going to do is remove the item at the index, and we'll just put like an X, or I think we can just do like an HTML entity code mult, I think. See if that works. Oh, that's not going to work because we haven't defined handle move yet, or handle remove. Okay, so handle remove takes an index. That's all. Okay. Now, if I know a lot of people don't use slice very often, so I'm just going to cover the syntax of that. So again, we're just updating value, and you'll notice that this is very verbose. That's why a lot of people use immutable.js. It doesn't really bother me because it's very clear if you understand the updates add-on, and it's very simple to understand the updates add-on because there's not 30 or so different functions. So I think that's worth it sometimes, but immutable.js probably has better performance. I haven't looked into it too much, but I often just use this and then use other things when I need to. So what we're doing here is we have our array, and we just want to remove an item from our array at the index that we have in this variable here. So in order to do that, we just say we're going to splice, and then we this one definitely takes an array of arrays. So each one of these is the arguments to splice. So we're going to say start at index, remove one item, and then if we passed anything else, it would insert at that spot. But we don't want to insert anything, we just want to remove. So that's it. And maybe we probably need to restart because there was an error. Ooh, okay. Syntax error. I just can't get over how great it is to have that right in my browser when I'm working on things. Cool, and we can just refresh. And mult. I don't actually know the character code for this. We're just gonna save it as X anyway. So I'm just gonna add some items while this is working on refreshing, and then blah blah blah. More items. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Moment of truth. Ding! It's gone. Now, if you've noticed, the only mistakes that I've made in this video are just like minor typos. But there hasn't been any like, oh, where's that bug? I have to track it down. I have no error message. It's like, this thing is just so simple once you understand it that it makes developing just so much easier. You never have to think about how you want to do something. You just kind of know. And it's, of course, very difficult at first. It's not something that's easy to pick up. It's not something that's easy to adjust your mind to. But once you get it, it really gives you a lot of productivity. Just in this video, I created a to-do list. A lot of people look for libraries, and there's all sorts of patterns and various things. This is the simplest way to do it in React. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.